Have you ever stopped to think about how one tiny mistake, a single flaw in a line of code, could actually explode into a global incident? I mean, something that costs billions of dollars. It really does sound like something out of a movie, but this is the world we live in now. So today, we're going to trace the wild journey of a software vulnerability, all the way from the moment it's found to the point where it becomes a weapon in a global conflict. Let's get into it.
Okay, to really get the stakes here, let's just start with a number, 10.5 trillion dollars. That is the insane amount of money that cybercrime is projected to cost annually by 2025. And we're not just talking about stolen credit cards, right? This is about hospitals being shut down, entire supply chains getting wrecked, and even national economies hanging by a thread. It's an absolutely staggering figure, and it shows you the scale of the battlefield we're talking about.
But here's the thing. All of that chaos, every single dollar of that cost can be traced back to one single origin point, a software vulnerability. Just a little flaw sitting there waiting to be discovered. The real story, the one we're telling today, begins the moment someone, somewhere, finds that flaw. So what happens next? Who finds it? What do they decide to do? And how does that one choice ripple out and end up affecting all of us?
So here's our game plan. We're going to start small, with the individual who actually finds the flaw and the tough choice they have to make. Then we're going to zoom out to the company that made the software, then zoom out again to the government that might want to use it as a weapon, and finally we'll hit the world stage, where these flaws become chess pieces in a massive global game. All right, so our story starts with one person, a security researcher. They've just found a digital key that could potentially unlock thousands, maybe millions, of doors. And right away, they face a huge decision. Do I tell the company that made the lock, or do I not? And believe me, this is not nearly as simple a choice as it sounds. To really get inside their head, there's this framework researchers use called the Vulnerability Discovery and Disclosure Model. You can basically think of it as a psychological roadmap. It helps us understand the decision by balancing two really powerful opposing forces: the fear of what could go wrong if they report it versus the hope that reporting it will actually get it fixed and that they'll be safe.
And that fear, it is absolutely real. Laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act can be turned against researchers, even when they're trying to do the right thing. Get this, studies show that a full 25% of researchers have faced legal threats. 1 in 4. That's a huge reason to just stay quiet. On the flip side, you have efficacy. This belief that, hey, if I follow the company's official process, their vulnerability disclosure policy, they'll actually fix the problem and I won't get sued. It's a high-stakes risk-reward calculation.
Now, here's what I find really fascinating. When you look at the data, you might think researchers are all about the money. You know, the bug bounties or getting famous. But it turns out a huge motivator is the potential harm to the organization. A lot of these folks are genuinely driven by a desire to stop a disaster before it happens. And that's exactly why having a clear vulnerability disclosure policy, especially one with a safe harbor clause, is so important. It tells the researcher, hey, we're on the same team, and gives them the confidence they need to come forward.
Okay, so let's say our researcher does the right thing and reports the flaw. Now, the hot potato gets tossed to the software vendor, the company that made the product in the first place. For them, a race against the clock has just begun. But what actually makes a giant company drop everything and rush to create a patch? To figure that out, we can borrow an idea from business school called organizational information processing theory. It sounds way more complicated than it is. The basic idea is simple. A company works best when its ability to handle information, like its R&D team and resources, matches how urgent and complex the problem is. If the problem is a 5-alarm fire, but your team has a leaky garden hose, you're going to have a bad time.
Which leads us right to the billion-dollar question. In the real world, with all the competing priorities and pressures a business faces, what are the specific things that actually light a fire under a software company to get a patch out the door, like yesterday? Well, the answers might surprise you. So a major study dug into exactly this, and here's what they found. Giving a company a heads up before the flaw goes public, that speeds things up. A really high severity score? Yep, that works too. And of course, a ton of media attention. But now look at what doesn't work. The number of products that are affected. Isn't that wild? You'd think that would be the biggest factor. So the key takeaway here is that it's not about the scale of the problem, but the intensity of the pressure. And for platforms that share this kind of info, this is gold. It tells them exactly how to frame a disclosure to get the fastest possible response from vendors.
And now the story gets even bigger. We're zooming out from corporations to the level of an entire country.
Because, you see, sometimes the one who finds a vulnerability isn't some researcher in their basement. Sometimes it's a government intelligence agency. And for them, the choices are very different.
In the United States, this decision-making is handled by a top-secret process called the Vulnerabilities Equities Process, or VEP. So when an agency like the NSA discovers a major, unpatched, zero-day flaw, the VEP kicks in. It's basically a secret debate club where different parts of the government argue over one critical question. Do we tell the vendor so they can fix it and protect everybody? Or do we keep it to ourselves and turn it into a weapon?
And this just lays bare the fundamental conflict at the heart of government. On one side, you've got the defenders. Their job is to protect government computers, our power grid, our banks, the whole economy. From their perspective, you have to disclose the flaw, period. But on the other side, you've got the offense. Their mission is to spy, to gather intelligence, to conduct cyber operations against enemies. And for them, that secret vulnerability is a priceless weapon. And trust me, this isn't some academic exercise. The story of Eternal Blue is the perfect and honestly terrifying real-world example. The NSA developed this exploit and used it secretly for years. Then, it got stolen and leaked online. What happened next was a catastrophe. Within months, North Korean hackers used it for the WannaCry attack, which literally crippled the British healthcare system. Then, Russian hackers used it for the NotPetya attack, causing billions in damages all over the world. It's the ultimate cautionary tale about choosing offense over defense.
So, from one secret government decision, we're now zooming out one last time to the entire global stage. Because out here, software flaws aren't just code anymore. They're strategic assets. They're bargaining chips in a new kind of Cold War that's being played out between international alliances.
So, to make sense of all this, experts use a model from game theory called the Cyber Alliance game. Just picture a country that's part of an alliance. Let's say NATO. One of its intelligence agencies finds a huge new vulnerability. Now what? Do they use it for their own selfish national gain and risk ticking off all their allies? Or do they share it with the alliance for the good of the group, even if it means losing their own secret advantage?
Now, in any alliance, not all members have the same amount of power, right? So in this game, we can sort them into three basic roles. First, you've got the dictator. This is the superpower whose vote is basically the only one that matters. Then there are the veto players. These are other major powers, and you can't do anything without their approval. And finally, you have the dummies, smaller countries whose vote, well, it never really decides the outcome. And which role you play completely changes your strategy.
So how does this actually shake out? While a dictator, a superpower, is pretty likely to share a vulnerability with its allies because it knows it can control what the alliance does with it. But a dummy? A smaller nation? They're much more likely to just use the exploit themselves, unilaterally. Why? Because if they share it, they lose all control over their discovery. The veto players? They're the interesting ones in the middle. Their decision can be swayed by the rules of the alliance, whether it rewards teamwork or encourages going rogue. A nation's power literally dictates its cyber strategy. You know, we started this whole journey with a really technical idea, a flaw in a piece of software. But as we've zoomed out, from the individual to the entire planet, it's become pretty clear that the word vulnerability means so much more than just bad code. There's a quote from the research that really just hits this nail on the head. It says that vulnerability isn't some bug in a machine. It's a fundamental feature of the human condition. That software flaw we started with, it's just the trigger. The real damage happens because it exposes the vulnerabilities that are already there in our lives, in our economies, and in our societies.
So that's the life cycle, right there. One technical flaw kicks off a massive chain reaction, and at every single step, it gets amplified by something deeply human. A researcher's personal ethics, a corporation's drive for profit, a government's obsession with secrets, and a nation's ambition on the world stage.
And what becomes crystal clear when you look at the whole system is that every single player in this story is operating from their own place of vulnerability. The researcher is vulnerable to lawsuits. The company is vulnerable to bad press and tanking stock prices. The government is vulnerable to a catastrophic attack. Everyone is just trying to manage their own risk, and often that means exploiting the weaknesses of somebody else.
Which brings us to one last really tough question. Our entire modern world, everything we do is built on a foundation of code that we know is flawed, that we know is vulnerable. So in a system with so many competing interests, personal gain, corporate profit, national power, who can we actually trust to be the guardian of that foundation? Who should we trust to protect it?